Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a close look at one of the most recognizable images in human history, Edward Munch's The Scream. But trust me, we are not doing a standard dry art history lesson today. We are going to unpack two wild true crime stories and uncover an unexpected, honestly kind of bizarre artistic philosophy that is going to completely change how you look at this masterpiece. Okay, let's just dive right in.
Picture this. It's February 12th, 1994. The entire country of Norway is totally distracted because the world's eyes are glued to the opening ceremonies of the Winter Olympics in Lillehammer. Well, meanwhile, over at the National Gallery in Oslo, two men are pulling off an art heist that takes a grand total of 50 seconds. And their high-tech breaking equipment? A ladder. Literally just a ladder. They climbed up, smashed a window, cut a world-famous painting right off the wall, and just vanished into the night. It was seriously that simple.
Section 1. The two historic heists, the 1994 and 2004 robberies. Because the craziest part about The Scream is that the 1994 robbery wasn't even an isolated incident. Exactly 10 years later, in 2004, the masterpiece would be the victim of a second, totally different, and frankly terrifying theft. The contrast between these two crimes is just massive. The 1994 heist was this lightning-fast, nighttime job involving a ladder and some shattered glass. But 2004, that was straight out of a Hollywood action movie. On August 22nd, hooded, armed men stormed the Munch Museum in Oslo in broad daylight. Right in front of dozens of totally stunned visitors, they literally tore The Scream and another masterpiece, Madonna, right off the walls, jumped into a getaway car, and disappeared. And that art was missing for 2 whole years. But let's rewind back to that first, quieter heist for a second. Because get this, the 1994 thieves didn't just take the painting. They actually left behind a cheeky, highly sarcastic calling card. Right in the empty space on the wall where a priceless piece of global heritage used to be, they left a note that just said, "Thanks for the poor security." It was incredibly humiliating for the museum, obviously, but it perfectly captured just how brazen these guys were. It actually took 4 years of planning to pull off that 1994 robbery. And the mastermind? Not some shadowy mob boss. It was Paul Enger, a former professional footballer turned art thief. He later admitted he planned the whole thing purely for the challenge of it. And you'll never guess where he hid one of the most sought-after paintings on the planet. He stuffed it between the boards of his family's dining table. His family was literally eating their dinner right on top of The Scream without having a clue. Thankfully, police managed to recover it totally intact about 3 months later. So you might be wondering, how exactly could this happen? How is it physically possible that the exact same painting was stolen from the National Gallery in '94 and then stolen again from a completely different building, the Munch Museum, in 2004? Were the museums sharing it? Did the thieves somehow steal a fake? Well, this brings us to the big reveal of today's explainer. Section 2. The 4 versions of the painting. A mystery solved. The whole mystery is actually incredibly easy to figure out once you look at it like an art historian. You see, there isn't just one Scream. When we talk about The Scream, we're actually talking about a series. Edward Munch didn't just paint this image once, call it a day, and walk away. He returned to it obsessively over a span of decades. Munch actually created 4 primary versions of this, plus a few lithographs. Versions 1 and 2 are from 1893. Version 3, which is a pastel from 1895, is actually the only one in private hands today. It sold at Sotheby's in 2012 for nearly $120 million. And then you have version 4, a tempera painted in 1910. So the thieves in '94, they took version 1 from the National Gallery, and the armed robbers in 2004 went to the Munch Museum and stole version 4. Those 1994 thieves definitely knew what they were targeting. They took version 1, the 1893 original done in oil, tempera, and pastel. It's the most famous iteration because it has this tiny, fascinating secret, a handwritten inscription hidden right in the paint that reads, "Could only have been painted by a madman." Because that was the flagship version of the artwork, stealing it caused this massive, absolute international scandal before it was safely recovered. But that 1910 version stolen in 2004? Yeah, it wasn't nearly as lucky. The aftermath was pretty devastating. The artworks were totally off the grid for 2 years, hidden away in terrible, unregulated conditions. Now, 3 men were eventually convicted in 2006, and security protocols across the globe were drastically stepped up. But the really tragic part was that version 4 suffered severe, irreparable moisture damage. Section 3. The horse treatment, Munch's eccentric philosophy. Now, as modern art lovers, hearing the words irreparable moisture damage attached to a masterpiece is absolutely horrifying, right? We imagine these works locked away in sterile, climate-controlled vaults. But to really understand the scream, we have to get inside the mind of its creator. Because honestly, Edvard Munch himself probably wouldn't have been horrified by the damage at all. In fact, he might have loved it.
Which brings us to a wonderfully bizarre Norwegian word, hestekur. That translates to horse treatment. This was Munch's deeply eccentric, super personal philosophy about his art. He completely rejected the idea that a painting was the sacred, untouchable object meant to be locked up in a glass case. He strongly believed that art needed to live, breathe, and physically age right alongside the artist. It needed to endure the world.
And he took this to the absolute extreme. We're talking intentionally leaving his priceless canvases outside in his garden, fully exposed to the freezing rain, the snow, the beating sun. He let birds use them as target practice. He let his dogs trample all over them. He would stack canvases up while they were still wet, let them gather tons of dust, drip candle wax on them, and literally walk on the paintings himself. I mean, it sounds like an art conservator's worst absolute nightmare. But, there was actually a method to his madness here. Munch explicitly said he wanted to eliminate the pretty, artificial surface of a fresh painting. He was totally uninterested in pristine illusions. He wanted his canvases to have this real, raw texture and a vital force. By forcing his art to face the physical chaos of the real world, he basically believed the elements were finishing the painting for him. Section 4. A Scar with Meaning, the Fate of the 1910 Version. So, when you look at that 2004 crime through the lens of Munch's hestekur philosophy, the whole narrative just completely flips. When the police finally recovered the 1910 version in 2006, the bottom left corner had this huge moisture stain that had literally dissolved the temper paint right off the canvas. The museum conservators were faced with a massive dilemma, but they made an incredibly bold decision. They stabilized the canvas so it wouldn't rot any further, but they consciously decided not to falsely reconstruct or repaint that missing corner. They just left the damage completely visible. They argued that trying to paint over it would totally rob the piece of its authenticity. Today, if you visit the Munch Museum, you see that water stain right there on the canvas. It's a mark of survival. It's this visceral, visual testimony of a violent 21st century heist. The museum's choice actually beautifully honors Munch's true intent. By leaving the scar, they allowed the harsh reality of history to physically mold the art, which is exactly what Munch always predicted should happen. Which really leaves us with this huge question to chew on today. Does damage ruin an artwork, or is it just the next chapter of its story? Is a pristine, perfect painting kept in the dark somehow more authentic than one that bears the physical scars of the wild world it lived in? Edvard Munch definitely knew his answer. So the next time you see the scream, look closely for those scars. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this sparked your curiosity, and I absolutely cannot wait to dive into our next topic with you. Keep learning.